Hey, everybody, this is Cave. I am a teacher at Roseville Area High School. I'm joined by Nick Palladian. Nick is an attorney for the Legal Rights Center in Minneapolis. Today is Tuesday, April 6th. Welcome back, Nick.
James, good to see you. Thanks for having me back.
Of course, there'd be no show without you. So I don't know anything.
Probably a better show without me.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. You should hear me in my class. I don't think my students think it was a better show. Anyway, so all joking aside, we're heading into, or we've been listening to prosecution witnesses now for what, a week and a half?
Yeah, we're I think day 7 today, so a full week. Yeah, yep.
Now, when we were talking earlier, you said we're kind of out of one stage of the prosecution's approach and we're heading into another one. Can you explain that and maybe tell us what those stages are?
Absolutely. So the first stage that we saw was really setting the scene, and the prosecution did that by really showing the jury, trying to put the jury on scene as if they were there. Right? They wanted the jury to see and hear and feel what the witnesses, what the bystanders saw. So we saw that with all of the body cameras being displayed. We saw that with all of the eyewitnesses coming and talking about, what they saw, what they heard, and the impact they had on them. And myself and a few other, many other defense attorneys were really, and we're sure there was a reason for this, but we were a little surprised by how much leeway and latitude some of the witnesses were allowed to talk about. How it made, how does this make you feel today? What's the impact on you a year later? A lot of that is, really, really going to connect with the jury in favor of the state. So you had young children coming in, you had elderly folks coming in, weeping, breaking down, clearly seeing the trauma that this inflicted on them, right? Watching this happen, and that heartbreaking feeling of some of them even blaming themselves, saying, I wish there was something I would have done, or I wish I would have done more. And it's heartbreaking because none of it is their fault. There's nothing more they really could have done. So we sort of saw that on the scene presence, having Donald Williams, having the firefighter, Genevieve, come in and just say, hey, here's what I saw, here's what happened. We've sort of moved on from that and gone into the technical side of Derek Chauvin's training and what law enforcement use of force experts, in their opinion, whether or not a reasonable officer would have reacted that way in the situation and whether or not the force used was reasonable. Keeping in mind that the lens the jury is looking at this through is, what did a reasonable officer, given the same circumstances and their training, what would they have done from the perspective of a police officer? So we're hearing some of that, and we're also hearing about what type of force, because peace officers are allowed to use force, but was it reasonable? And we're getting into that with the experts as well.
So I've always been under the impression, and maybe it's because I watch a lot of cop shows or maybe, whatever, that there is a thin blue line, but a really solid one, that police officers won't rat each other out. And so yesterday and today, a lot of Minneapolis people connected with the Minneapolis Police Department, the chief, the person in charge of handcuffing techniques or whatever it was, the tactics. It seems like they are throwing Chauvin off to the side. Okay, they're I don't know, what's going on there? Am I wrong that there's always been kind of this code of silence and that's been broken? And if that's so, why? Or is this just common? I just don't know it?
No, I in my opinion, I think you're absolutely correct. Law enforcement, whether it be through the union, the individual force units, it really is a brother and sisterhood, right? These are folks who feel close to one another. They view themselves, and many of them, as this, quote unquote warrior mentality of like, we are, it's almost a military type connection, right? To say,
we have a training called warrior training, right? I mean, that's,
yeah. Exactly. So you have this very much like it's us versus them. We are this band of brothers and sisters. We have a dangerous job. We bleed together. We fight together. And it is, I will say, policing can be a thankless job. Now, there's likely oftentimes good reason for that. But that, yes, they look out for their own, they protect their own. You and I talked about Bob Kroll. I think without getting political, you can just Google Bob Kroll and see, that is who the Minneapolis police leader is essentially. And there is no one more hardcore than Bob Kroll and sort of the union behind saying we back the blue, we back our officers, right? And the response to Black Lives Matter, that movement of Blue Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Really, and that's a different discussion for a different day. But I think we can just that dichotomy, right? If that's how folks in the force and ardent supporters of police view that issue.
So you are saying that typically there is a code of silence, or we're all in this together. Is that being broken now with the police chief and others in Minneapolis police, or again, is that just it's common, but I just don't know it?
I think it is uncommon in this situation because it's so egregious, right? It's so egregious. Whatever happens with the criminal case, it's so egregious. You look at it and you see what happened. It's ridiculous, right? And you saw that. I mean, a few things that you saw was the fact that all the officers were fired the next day. And they also, a few officers, I don't know how many, but at least a few with MPD wrote a letter and signed off on a letter saying that we reject and denounce what Derek Chauvin did. That is not who we are. That's not why we show up to work. And you typically don't see that. Police have been prosecuted previously, and you don't necessarily see that same distancing, right? Or at least open acknowledgement of distancing.
Well, how much of that is PR? Like, hey, it's so obvious to, after you see this tape, to say, hey, you know what? I denounce that. I mean, come on, that's not tough, but you're saying that is unusual regardless.
I think it is unusual, and I agree. It is easy to do. Someone, but at the same time, how often is that not done? Yeah. Right. So I think the fact that even a small act that it was done, I think just shows that this is whether it's for PR purposes or moral purposes, it is just a little different this time. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we're seeing almost every major leadership position from MPD come to court and testify, and with Chief Arredondo, with I think Lieutenant Zimmerman, he is the longest. He's been with MPD for 30 or 40 years. Having all of the training experts come in, the top brass, all coming in, all pointing at Derek Chauvin and saying that was not correct. That was not an appropriate use of force. That was not a permitted tactic. And we absolutely do not believe any reasonable officer would have done what he did that day, given those circumstances.
So we were texting yesterday, I think it was yesterday, or talking, whatever. And you said, I think it was yesterday, Monday, you said yesterday was a slam, or today was a slam dunk for the prosecution, or you said something like that. Do I recall that right? Was that yesterday, Monday, the 5th?
Yeah, yep, exactly.
Could you explain why you thought that was a slam dunk for the prosecution?
Yeah, I think that was one of the days where you really saw and that establishment of police officers, trainers, high-level veterans, seniors coming in and saying, pointing the finger at one of their own and saying, this was not proper, this was not protocol, this was certainly not reasonable, right? And those were not even necessarily use of force experts, right? Like today, we're having the official expert come in.
Right.
These other folks who've testified, they are, I would say they're sort of quasi experts. I think Judge Cahill gave them a little more leeway. If I were a defense attorney, I am a defense attorney. If I were the defense attorney, I would have been objecting, which I think Eric Nelson did, about the how far these witnesses were able to go in giving their opinion, given that they weren't technically full-blown experts. But they got there. They got to get up there and say, I've been a trainer for 30 years. I review force. I reviewed it in this case. I'm aware of the training, and this was totally unnecessary. And I think that was like 2 or 3 people in one day all really laying that out there, because the jury already saw you had the emotional side of it, you had that bystander effect, and now you've got the people. The next step is to say, okay, yes, this happened, but what about it? You know, was it, what was his training? What did he know? Was it, you know, can he do that? Can he not do that? And that was really, to me, a big body slam. Having those folks come in and say no, and those weren't even the official full-blown experts.
Right.
So I was just like, hey, that's powerful. It's good for the state.
So today, there was a non-Minneapolis police officer that testified. Is that what it's called, testifying?
Yeah.
Who was that? What was that person's role? And what do you think that, what's the impact of that person testifying today?
Yeah, so they're the individual, their name is Jody, and their last name is escaping me. I sort of caught the tail end of it, but they are a sort of a use of force expert with the LAPD, so the Los Angeles Police Department. And my wife and I were talking, and I shared this with you, just saying, boy, if you have the LAPD coming out telling you that you've done something wrong, you've probably done something wrong. So he was going through and just talking about, hey, you know, I think he is a Marine Corps veteran. He's gone through every police training you can go through. I think he testifies regularly, and getting up there and saying, hey, this was not good. Now, I do think they ended a little bit early today, and I think they had sort of ended before he was getting into the meat of his testimony. So they'll pick up with him tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Court TV, because that's what I'm following a lot on it. Court TV, they were talking about how they thought there might have been some issue about establishing that witness formally as an expert.
Mhm.
But I don't know. You know, a lot of times it's not. Sometimes you can stipulate to that or agree to that off the record. So I don't know if that was it or if something else came up. But I think we'll continue to see some meaty portions from that witness tomorrow morning.
Sure. So as many of these witnesses for the prosecution, the police officers and leadership who are backing the prosecution are essentially saying Chauvin did something wrong. I mean, is the defense going to come up with a training expert from New York? And will there be just as many police officers and admin and experts that speak for the defense?
Really good question, and I don't know. I should know that, but I don't know that. I think, you know, even if they get somebody, I think it's going to be really hard to overcome what's been put out there so far. And I do think I don't think it's a winning battle. I think it's the defense. I think is going to primarily continue to focus on George Floyd's drug use,
Yeah.
And medical or health issues like that. You know, they might have an expert, but I think the state could easily say, look, we've brought in local people, we've brought in everyone who he works with. This is a hired gun coming out. They got paid $40,000. Of course, they're going to say that this was a reasonable use of force.
Right.
I think the defense, it's a bad case, right? It's a really bad case, and you know, he's working with what he's got. He's doing what he can, and there's just not a lot there.
So at some point, and I know as a defense attorney, you're going to say absolutely not, but at some point, does Eric Nelson, the head defense attorney, does he see it's a losing battle and he just kind of mails it in? I mean, are we going to see him run through the finish line, or is at some point, is he going home, having a drink and saying, holy crap, this is a loser. And I don't have the energy for it anymore.
And you're absolutely right. Absolutely not. No, you know, as a defense attorney, you are a zealous advocate for your client, right? No matter how uphill the case may be or how unliked your client may be, you're gonna look for everything you can do, and it's a balancing act because you don't want to, like, nobody likes Derek Chauvin, right? He's probably one of the most hated people in the United States right now.
Yeah.
And as his lawyer, you don't want to come off as brash or as a jerk, but you also do need to force the state to prove their case. You know, the question comes up a lot is like, how can How can defense attorneys defend X, Y, or Z people? And I have a million issues with that, we could do a whole different series on that. But rock bottom, I think one of the biggest reasons is always, 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 as a defense attorney, you are defending the Constitution. And the Constitution applies to everybody, no matter how well liked or disliked. And whatever happens to, the person that we view as being the worst, well, if we peel back the rights and the protections of that individual, that's going to trickle down. And that's going to happen to people that we do like, people that we are more sympathetic towards. So I think he's going to go at it tooth and nail. It's a bad case, but I think he's picking up the points that he needs to, and I think he's doing, a good job of not alienating the jury and not coming off. I mean, obviously it's horrible, right? Like nobody likes to see this, but he's doing the best he can, and I think it's, you and I talked about the choice of choosing to, be the police union go-to person versus being, a public defender and having a person appointed. But he is going to give it hell all the way through the end. Whether they can pull it or not, who knows?
The way I see it is it's a no lose for him. It's a all win. That if he loses, yeah, you know what? Everyone thought he was going to lose. If he wins, I mean, is this? I don't know the legal world, but is this a stepping stone to a better job or bigger cases? You know what I mean? Would there be other than the Constitution, which I agree, is there a personal benefit for Eric Nelson to do this case?
I don't know. I don't know Eric Nelson, and I always am. So I'm hesitant to sort of get into people's motives because I don't know him. I don't know.
A lot of money from the police union, though, right? Just to work this case. Anyone.
I assume so. Yes, I assume there's some sort of retainer they are paying. According to the prosecutor, they're paying the bills for him. Eric Nelson did also represent Amy Sensor. I don't know if you remember that case at all.
Yeah.
So Joe Sensor, there are multiple sports bars and grills called Joe Sensors. He was a former Vikings football player, and his wife Amy Sensor hit and killed somebody with her car. And the defense was basically she didn't know that it was a person. She thought it was a traffic cone. Something like the dog isn't buying that apparently.
Okay. I was hoping no one heard, but I guess they did.
So he represented her as well. I think that one went to trial. I think they lost at trial. But this is his second, his highest profile case, but his second, fairly high profile case, at least in Minnesota.
Yeah. Random question. What the heck is Derek Chauvin writing on that legal pad?
I don't know. I initially thought, these are notes that it's his life on the line, right? So he's going to take notes. He wants to participate. He wants to make sure that he's pointing out things if his attorney missed something. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Sorry.
But at this point, I honestly just wonder if it's scribbles, if it's a focusing mechanism, a coping mechanism of some sort to say, you know what, I'm here, and it's either look awkward, and look, people could think I'm bored, people could think I don't care. The jury, when I say the people, I mean the jury. He doesn't care what you or I think at home. The jury wants to see me engaged, and whenever I work a case, we give our clients a notepad, and we say take notes, write things down. That it's often how we communicate too, because you have microphones, people are picking up everything, so you want to just keep things, if you can, nonverbal. But I don't know. He's writing so much, and it's constant, and I don't see him showing notes to his attorney. I think I've seen him do it one time. So it very well might just be something for him to do to look like he's keeping busy, and or be some sort of soothing coping mechanism.
Interesting. Very interesting. So you talked about 2 stages so far. What can we expect coming up? What other stage? We were the emotional, setting the scene. Now it's the expert, the restraint and, that kind of thing. What else is there? What other stages are there for the prosecution?
I think after this, we're going to start seeing more of the official medical, the expert medical testimony. And that's going to go directly to the cause of death, right? And that's really, I think, going to be the major battle. Stage one, the emotional scene, that completely goes in the state's favor. Stage two, this use of force, I think it's fair to say that that completely is going to go in the state's favor. The medical portion is really going to be, I think, the crux of where this case hangs either way.
Yeah.
So you're going to have, I think, 6 or 7 medical experts brought in by the state. You have a pulmonologist, a cardiologist, any other ologist you can think of. They're going to come in and say, hey, yep, I did the autopsy. Here is what I saw. Here to me is what appeared to be the cause of death. Here is how that cause of death can be brought about. And you can be certain the state knows its weakness, its point of attack that the defense is going to take is the drug use and the general health history of George Floyd.
Right.
So the state, is going to cover that with them and say, yes, you found X amount of fentanyl in his system. Explain to the jury what that means and how that may or may not have impacted it, and could it still have caused the death given X, Y, and Z scenario. And they're going to cover all of that. So I think the state is going to batten the hatches and say he died due to the asphyxiation, the cardiopulmonary arrest, based on Derek Chauvin's actions, not due to ingesting a bunch of drugs immediately. And that's what I think they're really going to focus on. And I think it's going to be hard to overcome. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical expert. But that's what we'll see. Then the defense is really going to rely on, I think it was Dr. Baker. So the Hennepin County medical examiner, his initial notes were, potentially geared more towards drugs. I think he wrote that if they had found George Floyd, say, inside of a bedroom in his home, without any other sort of information around him, just based on his lab work, they could rule it an overdose.
Okay.
So I think the defense is really going to use that as their club to say, hold on a second here. It absolutely could have been drugs. You said so in your notes. I think the doctor's notes said 3 nanoliters. I'm just making up the numbers, but three something is maybe baseline, or like, what would impact a person who doesn't use. And there were 11 nano whatevers inside of George Floyd's body. So the defense will work with that, and I think that's really going to be very technical and I think very dry portion of it. But I think that's going to be a really, really important one, because for all 3 charges, you have to show that it was Derek Chauvin who caused the death,
Right.
not this other thing. But one thing to keep in mind is it doesn't have to be the only cause, right? As long as Derek Chauvin's actions were a substantial causal factor. But for the superseding factor, then that would take it out of the realm. But they can say, I think it's safe to say that they can say, yes, he did have drugs that certainly didn't help, and maybe it added to it, but without Derek Chauvin's knee, he probably would have been okay had they gotten him to the hospital earlier, or just not done that.
And I think that's part of what to me anyway, now that you say this, I didn't think of this before, but why the prosecution showed the film of George Floyd inside Cup Foods, just joking around, just being regular, just, so it kind of to show, the drugs weren't affecting him, like, he was knocked down and he, it was so bad and whatever, right? I mean, is that part of it? I for sure think the prosecution's getting out in front of the drug use thing by bringing it up themselves, right?
Yeah, I think, I think that's partially that, for sure. Showing that, hey, he's sort of this, seemingly on the video, he was a guy having a good time, right? Maybe he was high. All right, so what? Like, he was, and he's a big dude, but so what? Like, there's a scene where a smaller person is going to walk, in front of him, and George Floyd like dances out of her way.
Yeah.
In a goofy manner, right? You would see him and think, wow, that guy's having fun. Maybe he's high, but he seems fairly harmless. I think where the defense argument comes in is that their theory is that George Floyd ingested the drugs once the officers came to the car. so after the store. And that's why they really wanted to bring up that other prior incident from 2019, saying that, hey, it was a similar arrest, similar approach by law enforcement. And he ingested a bunch of drugs very quickly in that incident, and then that sent his heart rate just skyrocketing.
Gotcha.
But and the defense also did get to point out, and I think the state, just sort of hedged their bets with this, was through Mr. Floyd's girlfriend, and her name is escaping me. But she testified about some of the drug use. So they actually got to bring up one more event.
Yeah.
I think not too long, maybe in March, maybe 2 months before this incident, where he had overdosed and had to go to the hospital. So the defense is going to use all of those other two incidences now to say, hey, here's this pattern and here's the impact it has on his heart.
Sure. Last question, yes or no? Does Keith Ellison get up yet? Will Keith Ellison be standing in front of us with the prosecution before this thing is over?
No, I don't think so. I could be very wrong. I'm not. Don't quote me on that. Don't bet on that. He's been through all of this so far, and I think it's more so his presence. I think he wants to. I'm not saying he's doing it for the credit, but I think he wants to just show his presence. Like, I am the attorney general, and this matters to me, and I'm gonna be the general, and I'm gonna oversee my troops, right, my prosecutors. But it can be very awkward for someone that the jury has never heard from. Besides, people probably know who he is, and he's introduced himself. But to inject someone into the trial who the jury hasn't heard from before could be a little maybe distracting. To say, hey, like, why is he coming up now? He didn't give an opening. He didn't direct any witnesses. And who knows, maybe he'll do some of the doctors, but I think the jury is comfortable with the other folks they have in the rotation. But the fact that he's there does surprise me, but I think he's making a point to be there. Like, he has a billion things going on every day. He's a very busy person, but he is blocking off time to say, I need to be here. This is where I need to be right now.
Yeah, probably for the outside world, he's doing it so the outside world sees. But I'm guessing, he's there, and the jury will automatically say, wow, the attorney general is here, on that side. Maybe it's just one little extra influence.
Totally. The state is pulling out all the stops. I mean, they are taking this seriously. The fact, and I think it's another great point that you brought up is the jury saying, whoa, he's here. They took the case from the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. And he is the face of the AG's office. The Attorney General's office does do criminal work, but it's my understanding is it's typically in maybe smaller counties where they just may not have the resources. The local county attorney's office may not have the resources to try a big murder case. So they ask the Attorney General to send out some folks. Like Matt Frank is the head of that criminal department. So I think he would go, or he would send out some of his people. But I think you're right. Putting a face of the people on this case, Mike Freeman and the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, depending on who you ask, but the people I asked and the people I know, that office and Mr. Freeman is not the face of the people. And that's a big part of why I think it went to the Attorney General's office. I think you've got a good point there.
So, and we don't know, of course, and we're probably getting a little long here, but how much longer does the prosecution go? I mean, do they just keep going? So if there's 3 stages, and I know you're just kind of generalizing, but if there's 3 stages, maybe we're already halfway through the second one, or into the second one. Are we talking about another 2 weeks? Or, I mean, could this really literally be another 3 or 4 weeks of the prosecution? I mean, I know the answer is yes, it could, but what best guess based on what's been going on so far and what you think the prosecution will try to do?
Yeah, I think they're moving. I want to say both. I think they're moving faster and slower than I thought. I think they brought in more bystanders, or that went on a little longer than I thought it would. But I know Judge Cahill, I think yesterday, did express to the state a little bit of not irritation, but kind of just that warning light flashing, saying, hey, I think at a certain point we're going to get repetitive. It's called cumulative.
Yeah.
Saying we've already heard that evidence. We don't need every single training officer from the last 19 years to come in. That's too much.
Yeah.
We get the point. Get on with it. So I would anticipate, I could see tomorrow wrapping up, maybe tomorrow, with the use of force experts. Part of it is tedious because they just have to do what's called laying foundation for this. So you could bring in a bunch of documents, but you have to have someone come in and say, yep, I know what those documents are. Derek Chauvin's name is on it. That means Derek Chauvin intended that. So it's another reason I'm glad this is being televised, is because it's not like it's shown on TV. It's not just glamorous people giving moving speeches. It's a lot of slow moving, treacherous work of like, if you want to get that document in, you might need half an hour of testimony to explain what that is. So Judge Cahill is going to be doing everything he can to move it along at a fast pace. But I anticipate we'll very shortly be moving out of the this use of force expert phase. And I think we'll get into the medical testimony probably sometime, if not tomorrow, later this week.
Okay. Last thing, Nick, are you an Esquire?
I am. It's very fancy. So Esquire is fancy for saying lawyer.
Oh, I think it's fancy. Nicholas Palladian Esquire.
Yes, exactly. It's I don't know, it's not, we don't have like doctors get to say like we're, Dr. MD, or professors can say I'm Professor X. We are, I don't know. It's on letterhead. I don't feel like a fancy person, but I do feel fancy when I say that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I got nothing. Teachers got nothing. We're just.
Are you kidding me? Teachers, you guys deserve like gold medals and pomp and circumstance and all those things. So
yeah, I know, but give me a title. Give me an Esquire. Maybe I'll work on that. All right, Nick, as usual, very enlightening. We appreciate it. We will see you again. Maybe why don't we do a live one coming up here? We can get some questions and answers from a live audience, but we'll keep checking in with you as this case goes on, or this trial goes on.
Sounds good, James. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks, Nick.